Hello and welcome. Today I am joined by Chris Hedges, who is Southern Clinical Lead at Pure Physio Sports. Chris, thank you for joining. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm really well. Thanks for having me on, Andy. It's great to be here.
No problem. And I really love the branding that you've got behind you there. So yeah, Finn will be proud of that.
Yeah, very happy with that. That's a tick for me.
So, Chris, I've known you for a number of years from the time in football and so on, but I'm keen to find out a bit more about you. So where are you from originally?
So I'm a Norwich boy, born and bred in probably the most out of the way county in the UK, which is brilliant. I grew up here, went away to Nottingham to study physiotherapy, left at 18 and was like, brilliant, I'm great to get out of this backwater, never coming back. And moved back when I was 21, never left ever again. So yeah, and Norfolk is a beautiful place to live. Highly recommend it to anyone. Best kept secret. No motorways because it's hard to get to. Yeah, so it's a great place to be. And obviously the mighty Canaries hail from here. Team very close to my heart and my career. So yeah, no, brilliant place to be.
It's a lovely city, isn't it, Norwich? It really is
A
nice.
fine city, in fact. That is its declaration.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, no, very good.
And so, how did you get into wanting to do physio then? What was the motivations around that?
So I mean, like most young children in the playground with a tennis ball and a pair of school shoes on, I thought I'd be an excellent football player. Very quickly realised that was not the case. So yeah, I always wanted to work in sport in some way, shape, or form. When I was born, so my mum 2 months before I was born went to Norwich's last appearance in a cup final in 1985 when we beat Sunderland 1-0 in the Milk Cup. And so my mum always thought I was destined to work in some kind of sport, and yeah, very much so. All kinds of sport. I've always loved playing all kinds of sport. Very much a jack of all trades, master of absolutely none of them. But yeah, I loved Norwich all my life. Remember going the first time in sort of 1991. Lost 4-2 to Villa, I think. Brian Gunn got chipped twice. He won't thank me for saying that. He was my first manager, and I worked a bit with Angus when he was at the academy as well. But yeah, so always been in sort of in love with football and in love with Norwich City. And then once I qualified, sort of 2 or 3 years after qualifying, got the opportunity to work there. The season we'd got relegated to League One, went in part-time, then full-time after a year, and then a further sort of 8 years building us as an academy towards sort of 3 successive Cat 1 ticks, playing all over the country, winning the FA Youth Cup, obviously in 2013. And yeah, just a great decade to be involved with the club. Lots of success on and off the pitch. Great people, some great people still there now. Just yeah, very blessed time.
Yeah, and we can come back onto some of the Norwich times, but like in terms of that, maybe that early mid '90s Norwich team, that was quite a successful one, wasn't it? Remember the
Yeah,
famous Jeremy Goss volley?
I'll tell you what, mate, and he's one of the club ambassadors now, and a nicer man you couldn't hope to meet. Very honest, but very caring as well. Yeah, very. Still, I think we are still the only English team that's ever won a tie in Bayern Munich Stadium. There you go.
Mm,
Little fact for the
yeah,
day.
yeah, no, it's a good one. It's a good one. And then, so in terms of choosing Nottingham, how did you end up there?
I just I think it was one of the better courses when I was going through to be a physio, and academically I'd achieved quite well, and when I went to the open day I really enjoyed it. They offered a range of optional modules in your third year, which wasn't common when I was going through university back in 2003. But they had some good sports and exercise medicine stuff, and sort of some more sports-based modules, which obviously I was quite keen for. So yeah, that was a big reason why I wanted to go there.
You've got a couple of legend tutors there in like Alan Taylor and Roger Kerry and those guys.
Yeah. Alan wasn't the course director when I was there. It was Graham Pope, but Roger very much was. Who else was there? Who was great? So Nick Bent, who used to be at Aston Villa Football Club, was there. Simon Mockett, sadly passed on now, but he's a great physiology lecturer. and yeah, Graham, as I mentioned as well. So yeah, some outstanding physios, and some that I trained with are back there lecturing now as well. So it's a good group with a very innovative course, is probably the right way to put it now. They've changed it for this year.
Right, in what way?
I think they've gone very much sort of not traditional physio skills, and very much sort of broad skills based. Be interesting to see how it pans out, really. But yeah, certainly something new. When you look at sort of the course syllabus, it's not quite what you and I would have gone through.
I think it's quite interesting with this now, because I was chatting with Mike James recently, talking about what they're doing in Wales, and that people are looking at things differently. What are your thoughts on revamping the physio? Because I feel like it's changed massively in the last few years, from like the work that Pure are doing, and just in the industry, it's very different.
Yeah, I think it's different, isn't it? Like, I really enjoyed the education we had. We spent time learning about massage, about mobes, not too much about exercise prescription, but that came later. And I guess while I'm not wedded to any of those modalities, I've worked in MSK practice for the better part of 20 years now, with children, adults, older adults, and I still find a use for all of those skills. So I guess in terms of the skills stuff, I think it'd be really sad if we lost a lot of that skills tutoring. And I think there is an incumbent kind of responsibility. What we paid to learn physio is not what you're paying now. I'm not sure if I was going through it now, I'd want to start life with a 50 grand debt, on the basis that my top earnings is going to be probably somewhere between 35 and 40k. It's a very different model now, especially when, and this is just my perception, and I've done a bit of lecturing here and there across the country, that the kids teach themselves a lot. They pay a lot of money and they teach themselves a lot. Whereas, that works for some, sure, but some people like to be taught. I like to be taught how to do things, and someone to show me how to use my hands and that kind of stuff. And I think we've got to be careful not to veer too far the other way, to look like strength and conditioning coaches. Physio has a niche, and we do need to produce people who've got them skills.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting perspective on it. And that, so when you were going through the degree, did you have an idea, or what was your idea of what you were planning on to go and do?
Yeah, this is obviously back in those days, you couldn't tell anyone you wanted to be a sports physio from the off. So yeah, I obviously didn't, with my hands and my fingers crossed behind my back, told them that I wanted to work in the NHS and all of that. But that's not me. While I enjoyed it and I did some junior rotation stuff, I wanted to get out into sport. That opportunity came for me sort of in 2009, when I went part-time at Norwich. And before that, I'd done maybe a couple of years sort of part-time as the head physio at Norwich Rugby Club, for rugby union, and then I've done some work with the developmental rugby, so Eastern Counties and all that kind of stuff. So I was kind of well versed practically with children when the opportunity came at Norwich, and by all accounts there weren't too many people at interview who had worked with children before. So yeah, I think I was lucky that I'd managed to pick that experience up for a little while beforehand. I mean, at university, it wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to work in sport, but I actively avoided the PEDS specific module and placements that we could have taken. But yeah, you often think you're going to do one thing and find out your career looks slightly different, doesn't it? So.
Yeah. And then, so in terms of actually finding that opportunity at Norwich, then, so how did that come about, and like what was the process like?
Yeah, so I mean, I was coming to the end of some sort of short-term contracts in the NHS locally in Norwich. I'd applied and not been successful for a full-time junior post, which, on reflection, probably the right thing. I'd no real interest in doing neuro or respiratory, or all of those kind of things. But yeah, I was working sort of part-time in a private clinic. and an opportunity came to do or to apply for a part-time role at Norwich. The interview process was fairly rigorous. I had about an hour and a half with the 18s physio and the academy manager, Ricky Martin, at the time. Thankfully was successful, took on the 12s to 16s for that year. And that would have been the under 15s that year, would go on to be the Youth Cup winners of 2013. So it was great to be around that group. After a year, I got offered the role full time. The other person who was doing the 9s to 11s didn't want to continue, so they amalgamated it into one role for me. Did that for 7 years through sort of the Cat 1 processes a couple of times. We introduced biobanding along with clubs like Southampton and Watford, which is quite a cool and innovative thing. My one research citation to date is around that Premier League study that they ran with Sean Cummins down at Bath University. Sort of 2017, big shake-up under Stuart Webber. A lot of staff left. We got asked to take the head of medicine's role. Did that for about 18 months. And then, we parted ways after that. I think anyone who's worked in the game will have a wry smile when I say parted ways. I think, we all know in football that necessarily you don't always go on your own terms, and football is a big ego place. And if your face doesn't fit or you don't get on with people, you can very quickly find yourself out of the door, which was certainly my experience. So, and then, kind of 4 or 5 years later, mucking around doing other things. I'm now just about to finish my roadmap for my FCP. Got some mock health training, and run a thriving, I have to say, sports injuries clinic here in Norwich, which is great. So, been real kind of up and down career, but very, very good.
Yeah, no, definitely. And in terms of like when you got the job at Norwich, then what do you think it was that made you be successful? Did you get feedback on that?
Yeah, I think it was one, I had some PEDS experience, and two, I was quite jovial, I was quite engaging. They thought I'd get on well with the kids. Ultimately, you're handling potentially future multi-million-pound athletes, and while not everyone gives you the credit for that, I very much saw that as both an opportunity and a responsibility. And it is, all of us who have children or have worked with children understand that they're going to be the future of our country, of our society. And, if you can handle them well and help them grow and develop, I think that's a very laudable thing to do.
Yeah, and then in terms of being successful, or however you define success, but running a sports medicine department in an elite team, what skills do you think you need for that?
Or probably some that I don't have. I think it hit me like a whirlwind. I have to say, I was in a place in my life where I've been married 4 or 5 years. I had a 2-year-old. We were just about to think about having a second one, which we eventually did as well. And it's a big step. It's a big commitment. You're in the building 5, 6, if not 7 days a week. I've got quite an active life outside of my work as well. I'm heavily involved in my church, and I do a lot of sort of mentoring of young men and things like that. So it was a big change to be, the 23s games program then. I don't know what it's quite like now, but games were all Fridays and Mondays. So if you played Friday, you're in Saturday morning to recover, and then you're off maybe Sunday. If you're playing Monday, you're in Saturday, in Sunday, game Monday, in Tuesday, off Wednesday. So, that's not necessarily brilliant around a young family or family life. And it's a big thing you have to consider when you're taking on these roles. So, but to be successful, I think you've got to have a good understanding of the entire pathway of a young adult going from being an 8-year-old to a 23-year-old. I think you've got to have good relationships up and down with your staff and with the first team staff. And you've got to have the respect of your peers. There's people around you, your academy manager, your strength and conditioning staff, your coaching staff. They've got to respect you enough to trust you when you say things. So I think obviously you've got to be a very high level physiotherapist. That's kind of a given, really. But all the other things were things I learned on the job and learned by probably making some mistakes that didn't necessarily help me there, but probably set me up quite well down the track for the things I'm doing now.
And do you get any support in terms of CPD outside of clinical around leading a team and all of those things?
No, not really. I think the club internally ran a leadership program, which was on a Thursday afternoon, which just would never have worked for my role. And I don't think I had the awareness to recognise that I needed some of that training at the time. I was leading quite a young department of relatively inexperienced people, and in a lot of ways, I didn't feel I could always just leave them to get on. Whereas before all the changes, you had a department of the head physio had 20 years experience, the 18s had 15 years, I had 12 years, and the guy under me or the lady under me had 5 years. We were an experienced department. When that all got shook up, suddenly I had 2 newly qualifieds leading the kids stuff, which I was really passionate about and obviously significantly experienced in. But you can't just supplant that into someone overnight. And then I've also got to manage the 23s and manage managers who maybe don't totally want to be 23s managers. They just want to do well enough to get themselves a first team role. And then other people around it as well. So yeah, it's difficult, and it's difficult for a head, to support you in that role, because ultimately, if you think you're under pressure as a 23s lead physio, try being a first team head physio with managers and multi-million-pound athletes, agents, their own physios and staff, and it's a difficult place, and it can be very lonely at times, especially when things aren't going well.
Yeah, and how often do you get together then with the first team staff?
I'd say we were pretty good at that. We had CPD fairly regularly, certainly for a while. The link was good, but football is so changeable and dynamic. If you take Daniel Fark came in and coached in a very European way, where you were in a lot and long hours. Whereas maybe a more traditional English manager, you'd be off Wednesday, Sunday. If you're playing Saturdays, it wasn't quite like that. Different models, different ways of working, and suddenly something that's been quite a stable job that works for your life outside of the game can just change on the change of a manager or a sporting director. So I think the CPD in general was good, but things are never set in stone.
Yeah, and so when things were coming to a head towards the end, then was that something that you were aware of, or was it a sudden thing?
Yeah, some things had happened in that pre-season where maybe some relationships had been damaged. Certainly, I wasn't happy with some of the things that went down, and I don't think some of the things that were said, particularly by me, were well received. I'd stand by him today in the same scenario. I'd do the same thing. And I've had a good 5 years to reflect upon it. But I basically got an email at 4:40 on a Monday that I had a performance review at 8 a.m. on a Tuesday. And 8 a.m. on a Tuesday, I was put on gardening leave, and that's it. Never been back since. So it comes around very quickly. There's obviously lots of ins and outs to that, but I'll put it to you this way. I'd been there nearly 10 years. I had 9 above average or outstanding PDR reviews, including the one in the end of the previous season. And suddenly I wasn't good enough to do my job anymore. So, I'll leave you to read into that what you will.
So, so when we're having that meeting then, so is it like, how is that conveyed to you in terms of it?
Yeah, I mean, so your head of HR is in there taking the notes. In my meeting, there was the first team head of physio, who's my direct line manager, and then there was the head of academy, who was Steve Weaver at the time. And look, people got their reasons for moving you on, one reason or another. Ultimately, I felt I was fairly well prepared for it because what had happened. in the pre-season, I'd kind of had an idea that it might be coming, so I'd prepared well with my with the FMPA's lawyers who I'd made aware that there was a problem in the pre-season, and so it was probably a lot smoother. But yeah, it's a difficult one. You don't like having to sit in a meeting and saying, well, look, what's the reason here? And when you hear it, you kind of go, well, that's not really a viable reason for getting rid of someone. That happened 8, 10, 12 weeks ago, and no one said a thing to me since about it. So why is it now a problem? And it just, it degenerates very quickly into mudslinging, and ultimately it becomes how you exit and what you exit with, not necessarily about what the reasons are. Ultimately, there's a breakdown in relationship that can be hidden behind a number of phrases, but there is no way to carry on working together, and someone has to move. And ultimately, someone like a head of medicine is probably an easier person to move on than an academy manager who's best friends with a sporting director.
Yeah.
Shall I say?
Yeah. And then, so you're on gardening leave then. What's your thought process then in terms of what your next step's going to be?
Well, I was 2 weeks. I've been back 1 week after 2 weeks off on paternity leave with my little girl, so I had my hands full. That was kind of late November, so we're getting into Christmas. My little boy's birthday was 2 days after I'd been put on gardening leave, so I had plenty to occupy my mind. But you spend 3 or 4 weeks sort of negotiating a severance package and all of that kind of stuff. So in a lot of ways, I wasn't under any great pressure to do anything. I wouldn't totally say I enjoyed Christmas. I'm very driven and work orientated as a person, so not having a job was hard. But I got into a bit of fitness. I had plenty to think about for Christmas. I have my wife to support, who's a GP partner, so she's got a pretty hectic life as well, even though she's on mat leave at the time, new baby. So yeah, I could kind of enjoy that, and then started thinking about, no real work comes up in January, does it? I'd had enough time in stock to think that I didn't really want to move my family around for my career. I certainly couldn't go down the road to the nearest football club. That would be torture, pulling on the old blue and white. That would be horrible. So I couldn't do that. And so I'd pretty much decided that my time working in sort of elite football was going to come to an end. My wife was quite happy with that. Let's be honest, for the last 5 years, life's been much better for my marriage, for my wife, for my family. Now I'm not working in that environment, and I've managed to find a way with Finn and Pierre's help to be as close to that as I can, but something that works better for family life. So I'm ultimately thankful for that. But yeah, I ended up taking a job at IPRS Health, and they were brilliant for me in terms of a place for me to kind of rehabilitate your confidence, because whatever reasons you leave, it's a knock. Especially I'd been doing a very niche role working with children in sport for 10 years. You kind of wonder whether you can still do it with everyone else, don't you? So IPRS were great. I was very transparent with them about what happened to me. They were great in terms of helping me. Sharon Hester, who was the site manager in Norwich, Paul Scallon, Ash James, they were great. I had a really good time learning some new skills. It was a great year, really, really good year. Then Finn approached me about whether I'd be interested in doing some FCP work, and dangled the carrot about a sports injuries clinic, which is now obviously Pure Physio Sports 3 or 4 years down the line. But yeah, it was an offer I couldn't really turn down at the time. I wanted to do something new. I'd never really got that chance to kind of repay my NHS bursaries and training when I was a junior, so it seemed like a win-win. I could give something back to primary care and then think about doing some sport stuff. So yeah, it was a good move. I'm nearly, what will it be, 4 years in April that I'll have been here, and yeah, it's been a great time for me. I've really, really enjoyed it.
So how did that initial conversation with Finn come about?
So there's a guy here who's our deputy regional lead, Ben Bradford, who was a student with myself and Damien Bowyer at Norwich. and he kind of recommended me to Finn, and Finn gave me a call. I went out for a walk with him. We had a bit of a chat. He invited me to apply. I applied. The rest is history, really. So yeah, Finn's a great businessman, a good guy to work for. But if he wants you, he makes you feel wanted, and that's I can but thank him. He made me feel wanted, and he's made me feel loved, cared for, and trusted me to grow the stuff here. So I can't really ask for any more.
Yeah, Pure seemed to, in it, having met Finn, it's that symbiotic with that, in terms of just, it seems like a great vibe around the company, like the feedback that you give, like Mehmet, Dom, all the guys there, that it seems very genuine, that everyone loves working there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, for a company to go from 40 on the brink of a pandemic to 450 through a pandemic and a couple of years after, I mean, I don't know many companies that have grown the way Pure have grown over the last 4 or 5 years, and that is led from the top. Finn is an incredibly driven guy, and he wants to change the landscape and improve the quality of MSK provision nationwide, and that feeds down into allowing clinicians to express their ideas and develop them. And we've, like you say, you list a few names there. People like Matt Shutt, who's run our CPD, Ben Bradford, who looks after our FCP stuff now with Lauren Greenwood Davis. We've got some real exceptional clinicians that are being invested in, and therefore that makes it easier to give back. And when you pitch ideas and they're listened to and then they get worked up, that gives you the confidence, doesn't it? You've been in those environments, I've been in those environments where sometimes you put something down, you think it'll really work, and it's not that they won't do it, but you don't necessarily feel totally listened to. Here you get listened to, and that's a real key thing. And plus, if you want to get better, there's ways to get better. So many people who've come in at one level and moved up through the company. It's a real opportunity for anyone who wants to come in and make themselves better. They can come and do it here.
And how big is the emphasis on like the non-clinical skills as well, in terms of sharing the mission with the team and get-togethers? Again, I follow it on social media, and it seems like there's a lot of things going on.
Yeah, definitely. I think we've I mentioned about that leadership training that maybe would have been beneficial to me at Norwich. Certainly we've had some leadership training here in terms of how to manage people, how to do one-to-ones, PDRs, long and short-term goal setting, and that's been really beneficial. So yeah, there's a lot of training and developing you as people that doesn't necessarily affect what goes on with your patient contacts, but allows you to help the staff that are in your care to grow and develop and become the physios they want to become. So yeah, Pierre has a vision about the way we want to provide MSK care in all the different facets of MSK care, and I think we're well on the way to delivering that. So yeah, it's good, very good.
And then in terms of when you're recruiting, now you're in a senior position in terms of building out the south for the sports side of things. When you're recruiting, what are the characteristics that you're looking for in people?
Well, I think we've been really lucky that we've been able to bring people through from within the business. So we haven't had to look outside too much in terms of the sports stuff. It's been really easy to highlight people who've got either a sports background or people who've maybe been sports therapists and then crossed over into physio and had a skill set in those areas already. So Jake Yole and Maeve Flynn, who work with me here in the clinic at the moment, both sort of sports therapists, done masters conversions to physio, excellent in their sports knowledge. We have sort of a training package for our junior staff on about a 2-year cycle that includes sort of 4 or 5 months worth of sort of basic grounding in sports that we've developed, being aware of those kind of position stands and different sort of treatment modalities. So including the pediatric stuff as well, which obviously is something really close to my heart. So yeah, luckily we haven't had to look externally thus far. We've got good people and we can develop them. But I think if you want to be a sports clinician, I think you've got to go out and kind of find it for yourself. You know, I didn't just fall into a job at Norwich. I had to do 2 or 3 years of working evenings and weekends at small rugby clubs and being prepared to travel down to Essex on a day's notice for a game and things like that. You've got to go and put yourself out there to build that CV. And then, like I say, like you asked me earlier, the key thing that swung it for me in Norwich was, one, I had the skill set. I'd gone out and done that myself, and two, I had the personality and the drive to be fun and engaging around young people. I think they're really key skills with being a sports physio.
And then you mentioned earlier on about being driven when you're on gardening leave. Like, what are your motivations? What does excite you?
Yeah, I think, look, I love being a physiotherapist. I've always wanted to work around making people's lives better. And the big expression of that for me is around helping them with their physical health, and there's knock-on effects onto their psychological and social sort of well-being as well. But yeah, I think anything around sport, anything around making people's lives better, anything that's maybe going to improve me, I think being self-effacing enough to know where your blind spots are and the things you aren't so good at, and being prepared to work at those things. Like, I'm naturally a gifted manager. I wouldn't say I'm very good with people, but I'm naturally brilliant at the admin side of it and that stuff. So I've had to work at that to make myself a more rounded person to be employable at a higher level in a company.
Yeah, no, it is really good to see a company investing in the team and wanting to keep it together, because and I know certain places that I've worked in previously is that sometimes it's more about like the financial element than actually investing in the team, which I would say is counterproductive, because you want people there for the long haul.
Yeah, and I think like anything, you get more out of happy people. So if you're going to invest in people developing and becoming better, and they're happy and they feel in an environment where they can thrive, you're going to get the best out of them. I've worked across 2 or 3 now multi-million-pound organisations in football, in Ock Health with IPRS, and now here at Pure. And environment is such a big thing. If you can create a vision and create the right environment, you'll get growth. And Pure is a prime example of that.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, I worked for IPRS for 5.5 years, and again, it gave me all the opportunities that I have now. In terms of the way that because they used to do focus days when I was there. I don't know if they still called them those, right? And we used to get some interesting speakers onto those things. But again, I've had a few people from IPRS on this podcast as well. And so, how was it going from sport to that? And then, because I suppose you've worked in quite a specific environment, and then to go into a private company, what was that like?
Yeah, and become essentially a generalist physio again, which was exciting and daunting, probably all in one breath. But I think what I really enjoyed about Ock Health was the width. Learning to do DSEs, vehicle assessments, functional capacity exams, which mentally to me were very much like a pre-signing medical. So it was an easy translation for me with slightly different tipping points. Being able to sort of make reasonable adjustments to people's working practices and patterns is a bit like putting a sort of a pre-season program in place for an athlete. So I think between sport and Ock Health, there's a lot of transferability if you can look at it in the right way. And obviously IPRS started, as you well know, out of a physio at a football club, going, I don't really want to live this lifestyle anymore. There must be another way. And so I think there's a lot of good transferability there. IPRS was great. There was a real focus on the quality of what you provided. You weren't 100% booked diaries all the time. There was a real, everyone had projects to do within the company. So I was involved in sort of developing a buddy system and a sort of a peer review system. They were the 2 things that I was kind of involved in early on. And then sort of assessing people's scores on their functional outcomes. So that was another project I did while I was there. But my diary is probably 85% full every day. and the rest of the time I was given the freedom to work on my projects. So add that into things like DSEs and VAs and FCEs, it just adds a nice variety to what you're doing. And here at Pure, I've worked across FCP work, I've done some OC health stuff, I do some sports injury stuff, I work with some clubs. It's nice to have variety.
And you're doing work at you're still doing work at Bucks New Uni?
Yeah. So Neil, second head physio at Norwich, but definitely the longest one I had in my time there. And yeah, Neil's an exceptional physio. You don't do several years at Arsenal in a department with I forget the two brothers who've set up on their own clinic now, but the Lewins, that's it. You don't work in that environment with that quality of player unless you got some real aptitude. So Neil was great. He really, I don't think he fully thought that a role like mine, being a 9 to 16s lead, could work. But when I initially took it, but yeah, he certainly helped me in terms of developing it over time. And yeah, it's nice to still have that relationship with him and go down and guest lecture for him on his course every so often as well.
No, Neil's great. I loved my chat with him on here, and that my colleague Dom was doing some training with him and Nick for some of the students on Shockwave this week as well, which I think he really enjoyed. So no, it's good. It's good. Like, in terms of them, for your advice when you're with these students, with the staff coming through at Pure, like what's your advice to them, from forgetting the clinical side of things, like the non-clinical side? What are the core things that they should be thinking about?
I think having a rough plan is always important. Like knowing where you want to be 4 or 5 years down the line is important, because you can just bumble through stuff. And I think knowing roughly where you want to go, and accepting that those things might change a little bit over time. Like if you'd have asked me when I left university what I wanted to do, it would have been first team football head for 40 years. Now I got into working in academy sport, and I realised that I loved working with young people and helping them go through their maturational changes and becoming young men, and that stuff really excited me, the developing talent rather than someone who's already made it and maybe has slightly different goals or mindsets or whatever. The great thing about young kids in football academies is they're all driven, they all want to make it, they'll all listen, they'll all do the right stuff. And that's a really exciting thing to be able to work with and shape and help develop, and that's something that I love doing outside of my physio work as well. So I think also being aware of what skills you do and don't have. We've all got different skills mixes and whatever else. If you're quite extroverted and you love people and you love developing people, you might want to think about having a tilt at lecturing or things like that. So I guess knowing what your other skills outside of your clinical skills are and what you can kind of do there. And I think just accepting early on that you are never going to know everything. There's no one you meet who you can't learn something from. And maybe being humble enough, and I've learned that lesson through not being particularly humble at times, but having that humility to know that you don't know everything and that you can always learn something from someone is a real good thing to foster.
Oh, definitely. In terms of that mentoring that you do, then you mentioned you do some stuff outside. Was that through the church, you were saying?
Yeah.
So what does that involve?
So me and my wife and a couple of others look after kind of what we would call our students, or our 18s and 20s. So we call that authentic. It's about sort of most people who maybe move away to university as an 18-year-old maybe have grown up in the church and kind of grown and have their parents' faith, and it's about helping them find their own and finding their identities in Jesus and all of that kind of stuff. So we try, and our vision is to help them become what the Bible describes as mature Christians, so people who understand their faith, understand their doctrine, and want to live that life. So I love meeting new people. I love working with them, seeing what they love, and helping them try and find a way to grow and expand in that. No different to what I do day to day with physio, but just around sports injuries. This is around sort of people and personal development and that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's what a privilege.
No, definitely. I think as in my time, even though I'm involved in this world now, I think that personal people development, team, all of those things, that's probably what interests me most. So that's why I like these sort of conversations at the end in terms of working with it. Obviously, you've been doing it from a professional standpoint at the club as well. So around that then, so how have you seen the change for, say, academy players? There's a lot of perception now that, well, maybe it's a reality as well, that they're getting paid way too much. They're not cleaning the boots of people anymore. What's your view on that?
So, I mean, look, when I left Norwich in 2018, the scholars are still cleaning boots. For the first team, that's an important part of mentoring, is you get assigned your player for the year who you've got to look after, and you've got to learn to look after the needs of someone else, and be around for them. If they want something doing, you've got to do it. And there is nothing wrong or bad about learning how to serve the needs of other people. And it is a humility thing, and it is good for 16, 17, 18-year-olds to learn to serve others. I think that's, if it isn't happening now, it should be. And I don't see what the problem with it is. I think it is, the academy structure is only for the better. The EPPP came in sort of 2012, and I don't think anyone would argue that the current crop of depth of English players is as good as it's been since the perceived golden generation, and that is because of what the raised standards that the clubs have to adhere to. There's absolutely no doubt about it. So I think the structure is better. I'm not sure totally about the hours. I think younger children coming out of school for day release, coming up from North London, say on a Wednesday night, having all day playing football on a Thursday and having to catch up their schoolwork. I'm not totally sold on that, especially when such a low percentage make it. But is it a better system than it's ever been? Yes. Are the disciplines still there? They were when I left, and I hope they still are. I don't see. Yes, they earn too much money, but the game is awash with money, and I don't blame people for that. If someone offered me that money to do my job, I doubt anyone would turn it down. I think there's maybe a little bit of green-eyed monster and jealousy attached to saying they earn too much money. Ultimately, you're worth what someone will pay you in any industry. So I don't blame the players for cashing in on it. But yeah, I do think there's a better structure. And when you look to the German game, if you don't make the match day 22 or whatever, you're only getting 20% of your agreed wages. I think that incentivizes people to be fit, and 20% of your wage, 20-30 grand a week, is still more money than most people earn in a year. So are there ways it could change and be better? Absolutely. And should it happen? Yes. So yeah, I think players do earn too much money. There's no way around that, but that is the game. Are there structural changes within the game that could make that better? Yes.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It's good to get that perspective on it. And then just a last question. So outside of clinical work, do you any particular books that you read from a personal development perspective?
Yeah, so I obviously, as a Christian, read a lot of Christian apologetic books, and I think there is, whether you're a believer or not, I think there's a lot of wealth to be learned from sort of church history or history full stop. What am I reading at the moment? I've got a book called The God of the Idols by Timothy Keller, which was written just after the financial crash in 2008. I find that a really interesting book. I'm reading a book called Faith at Work, about living as a Christian in the workplace. And I think, look, there's a variety of sort of leadership or sports books you could always read. I think we were replete with kind of players' autobiographies. Never sure I find them particularly that helpful. But books like Thinking Fast, Moving Slow, those kind of core staples, I think, of sort of sports management or sort of psychological care are really good. If you're working with young adults, things like the Talent Code and that kind of stuff. Bit of a spoiler here, but those books sort of say it's not genetically inbred. It's kind of, it's all about how hard you're prepared to work and what you're prepared to put in to make it, and all of those kind of things. So, yeah, I think there is a wonderful set of knowledge you can gain, but probably your experience is just as important as anything you can read in a book. Reflecting on your experiences in life and what you've been through and learning from those things. And if you're the same person 5 years down the track that you were 5 years ago, you kind of missed a trick, haven't you? We can all be learning, developing, getting better. And I don't say that as just a platitude. I think that does really involve a bit of introspection and working out where you've got stuff wrong and trying to put things in place to make sure it doesn't happen again, and celebrating when you've got things right and trying to harness how you got it right so you can do it more repeatedly.
Yeah, good. No, well, that's a great lesson to finish on. So, Chris, I really appreciate your time. Thanks for being so open and candid. And yeah, I'll look forward to making a visit down to Norwich soon.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Andy. And yeah, love what you do with the podcast and with the company.
Thank you very much. Cheers, Chris. See you soon.
Cheers. Bye.